Monalisa is so many things, but above all, somebody that believes that human beings deserve to live dignifying lives and lives free of people that want to bring us down and all that stuff.
Welcome to Debunque. I'm Mariana Schwetze, your host for today's episode and the podcast producer. Today, we will be listening to a deeply insightful interview with human rights activist Monalisa Akitole about the complex realities faced by trans women and other LGBTQ+ people in Uganda. Recent years have been particularly challenging to the trans community in the African country. In 2023, as we've discussed in previous episodes, the Ugandan government enacted the Anti-Homosexuality Act, or the AHA, a law that imposes extreme penalties for same-sex relationships and other LGBTQ+ experiences. Its passage has intensified surveillance, harassment, and violence against LGBTQ+ individuals and activists. In our previous episode, we discussed the impacts of the recent United States funding freeze to part of its USAID support in Uganda. The funding freeze has severely disrupted health services in the country and has immense impacts on the lives of many people in Uganda, especially in queer communities. As we've already discussed, this funding withdrawal has also meant diminished access to essential services, including healthcare, advocacy, and community-based support. Experts warn of the immense real-life consequences of this decision. You can hear a conversation with Dr. Andrew Tendo from Proud Legends Initiative in our previous episode to learn more. Today, we'll hear from Monalisa, a trans woman and advocate with the Uganda Trans Forum. We'll delve into the challenges faced by trans people and their advocates in Uganda, the impact of generalized misconceptions, and the specific difficulties exacerbated by the recent funding cuts. So here's Monalisa. Thank you so much for joining us today, Monalisa. Just to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work as a human rights advocate and researcher?
Monalisa, my name is Monalisa Akitole. I am so many things, but in this particular space, I want to think of myself as somebody that is a global citizen. Everything that happens in the world kind of affects the way I think about the world, the way I look at the world lately with the insanity happening. So Monalisa is someone that grew up feeling very uncomfortable with injustice in all its forms and as it comes out. I'm also somebody that is very passionate about life, very people-centered, and I am a trans activist in Uganda, and I happen to be privileged to serve at the Uganda National Trans Forum, which is a coordinating body for trans and gender diverse movements in Uganda. And it's sort of my privilege to sit in such a space and be able to support communities when it comes to advocacy around transgender and gender diverse persons. Recently, I would say that I'm a historian. I got my master's degree at a university in Germany where I was for the past year or so. So Monalisa is so many things, but above all, somebody that believes that human beings deserve to live dignifying lives and lives free of people that want to bring us down and all that stuff.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask, from your experience and of those around you, what can you say about the life of a transgender person living in Uganda amidst everything that is going on and the different cultural norms and beliefs and biases?
I think the world is just running to insanity with people being in places of power acting like kids. Somebody wakes up one morning and is like, oh my God, they don't deserve to live. Oh my God, they're just two genders. So I would say that living as a transgender person in Uganda is extremely difficult. Culture norms are deeply conservative with strong traditional gender roles, and most religious institutions, whether Christian, Muslim, or traditional, view anything outside of cis normativity as sinful or unnatural. And this sort of creates a hostile environment where trans people like myself face daily discrimination, violence, and social exclusion, especially if you're speaking in a context of people that have been indoctrinated and they grow up in systems where religion is held at the centerpiece. So if you come out to be different from what the Bible says of man and woman, you are demonized, right? And so that creates a situation of social exclusion. And it often also means that you're going to be rejected by family, losing access to education and employment, and constantly living in fear of being outed or attacked for simply being a transgender identifying individual. So the life of a transgender person operating and working in Uganda has been one of where you are not sure of your tomorrow because of the systems and the environment around us that just wants to gag us and do away with us. And that makes it very hard for trans persons to just live, to just be productive and get to enjoy the rights of any other person living in Uganda.
You're talking about the actions of people in power, and since the very first episode of this podcast, we've mentioned the Anti-Homosexuality Act that was passed in May of 2023 in Uganda. Can you talk a little bit about the differences in the environment and the day-to-day lives of queer people before and after this law was passed? How has the Anti-Homosexuality Act changed the landscape for trans women in Uganda?
I will begin off by saying that it wasn't any better. I don't remember in my years of being trans and my community members of a time where we felt safe, in a time where we felt accepted, right? So even before the Anti-Homosexuality Act, we have laws of the land that don't see us as people, that seek to marginalize us, that do not appreciate that there is something beyond man and woman. So even when we know that the AHA is very recent, which is 2023, our lives before the AHA haven't been any easier. And so the AHA is that apex of where transgender persons find it actually very harder to live in Uganda, because now you have a law, an act that speaks to actually criminalizing you and coming for you directly, because it speaks around same-sex relationships. And so few of Ugandans can separate transness from sexual identity and all those things. So we are bundled up as one. And the AHA, in the way it was crafted, was to do away with people that are seen as immoral or as those other people that do not deserve to be a part of this space. And this is taken away from the title of the law itself, the Anti-Homosexuality Act. What does that mean? It means that we are against you. We don't want you to exist. So everything that builds up to that is to say that you are not seen as a citizen, you are not appreciated as a living being, and no wonder we see the social exclusion, the unemployment that plays into it, and just people violating you because you simply want to live your authentic self, right? And so to have those conversations of what does that mean for me to live in a world where there's this law really coming for me and criminalizing me and saying, Mona Lisa, you will not live to see another day. Because then who do you get even to report to when you violated if the state itself that is supposed to protect you is having a law against you? So transgender persons are really having a hard time navigating this space. It wasn't any better, it just got worse. For you to not be seen, to be appreciated, to be acknowledged as any other person. And to also, because in Uganda, when this law was a bill before it became law, there was discussions around people of how do you get to identify a homosexual? I'll put it that way. And what comes clearly to people's minds is people like ourselves, right? Because we are very visible. We are out there. We are living our authentic selves. A gay man could pass the street and not face an issue, but then it really targeted that person that is trans, that is really transcending what people know about being male or female, that chooses to identify as Mona Lisa, and yet their birth name was something else, right? And so it's speaking to the visibility of that person that was then picked out and said, we cannot let these people live. And so even within the community, there were conversations of transgender people were the cause of all of this, because of this representation and visibility. Yeah. And so for me, life has gotten really hard for my community members to just be able to live. You can't get a national ID in your preferred names. What does that mean for housing? What does that mean for employment? And we know that these are the basic things that people need to live dignifying lives. If you're denied that, that means you're being violated. You are subjugated and not seen as a full human. So really, the life before and after, I would say in the past before the AHA, there was a little bit of toleration, but now it has gotten worse to say that we have something that comes for you and comes in your face. So what are you going to do about it? And we have political people speaking about that and saying we cannot let them be. And if you happen to watch the news at that time, people were disgusted about us in general. So yeah, it's really hard to navigate a world where you are not seen as a human being. And you could come off as a statistic of somebody that has been killed and nobody cares because then we want to do away with you. So it is really hard to navigate such times.
I think that's a reason why your work too is so brave and important. And you're talking about the lack of protections in terms of the government and even the encouragement of all this hate and violence. How has the law, since it passed, affected your ability to organize and advocate for the trans right within your community?
As somebody that is sitting at the Uganda National Trans Forum, which is a coordinating body for transgender and gender diverse communities and individuals, is that it makes, because this is the current tide that we're having to live in, it makes working very impossible. Organizing meetings where you just want to meet with your community members and discuss about what is happening in our lives. How can we economically empower ourselves? That is impossible because when they see you 30 people, 25 people in a room and you look different from the other people, is one. I remember an incident where we had to stop our meeting halfway. And it's not that we had planned for a half day, but then there were conversations of people just looking at you in a disgusting way. And we clearly knew it wasn't safe anymore. So we had to stop the meeting, right? And yet we had very good deliberations for the community. So our organizing has been affected because of this law that is in place. Running awareness campaigns, you simply can't even speak about who is a transgender person because you are looked at as a promoter. This law speaks of we shall not let them voice and be heard and be seen. And it's that act of wanting to silence the voices that come out to speak that are not allowed to actually be able to speak, because it speaks to what am I going to say that is not promotion? Me talking about a transgender person and living their authentic self, isn't that promotion to the Ugandan lawmakers and everything, like our state? You don't even know that discussions, you can't discuss about yourselves authentically online because also that space is surveilled, right? So we used to think that, yes, we cannot do this work physically, but we are also seeing that in a time where we are getting to elections and always we are being scapegoated within this time is when we tend to post things about community, we are really surveilled by state. And we see it working in where our social media handles are being hacked. So even that space where you would reach and amplify your voices is stifled. Yeah. Um, Thinking of things of what does promoting homosexuality mean when I'm speaking about a trans person who was murdered, a trans person who has no housing. Because you're trans before you're a human, you can't have that conversation. There's no honesty in our stories anymore, because then we have to do the sugarcoating of this is just a person that was killed and everything. And so there's that sort of you need to be aware of that messaging that you're sending out to be able to keep the other community members safe. So we are getting to sugarcoat and not tell stories, not because we don't want to, but we also need to keep ourselves safe. So the censorship in the way that we do this work is sort of coming up, right? Because people need to keep safe, need to keep doing this work. You can't report authentically. You're having to call yourself a youth. So also the language is taken up because we need to protect these spaces that we have built for our communities to still get the services that they need. And so we're having to change language. And for me, it brings me to a space where I'm worried that soon we'll lose language around us. What speaks to me as a transgender person? Because everything seems not to be allowed. Do not say you're trans. Do not say you're marginalized. Do not say you are othered. And that's the reality. So then where's the language in that? And we are finding it so hard to navigate that space to say, how do we present our issues, especially when you need to speak to issues of data and people that have been violated, but you can't name names. So it is making also advocacy work hard. And the AHA just plays in to amplify all this hate, the rhetoric around we are coming for family. It's something that is sitting in people's minds. So we also do not have people that are for us, that those that are for us are really very few people to counter the narrative of what is going on in the world. So there is also fear that people will be deregistered. If you speak out and be out and about everywhere, they will get to point you out and freeze your account. And we saw that happening immediately after the signing of the Anti-Homosexuality Act in 2023. I remember where I was previously working, we had to sort of go slow on some issues, right? Because then our accounts were frozen. We couldn't work anymore. What does that mean for an organization that really does depend on donor funding to do this work? So you can't even give out health service delivery to your members. Because where is the money coming from? It's coming from a donor that sent money to your bank, but you can't be able to access it because it is frozen. And that is playing into to undermine us as human beings, to belittle us. When you look at the violations that have happened ever since the signing of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, is that it played into silencing us. It played into belittling us. It played into just undermining our very own existence as people that do this work. And it's really not a safe place to continue to do this work. Even when you thrive and you do this amazing work, you're still reminded that you're living in a context that does not appreciate you as a human being. The level of violations that happen after that, reporting 267 transgender and gender diverse individuals, and that number still goes up, is not a little number. To say that we have 15 people that are homeless, what does that mean around dignity for people that can't just even have a basic home? What does it mean when somebody goes to a healthcare setting, facility, and they cannot access just the basic of drugs? And the only thing that invites you to the gate is the stigma and discrimination of you're not appreciated here. We don't understand. You go back, change. That trouser, no, 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 no. So what does that mean for a transgender person? And it's just been so hard. It's not been an easy place. Even when we have found pockets of joy amidst all that is happening, it is still so hard and very traumatizing for people to constantly have to wake up and you are not so sure of tomorrow. I don't know. I don't know if I am saying whatever I'm saying and somebody out there is listening to what I'm saying, and the next day they are coming for me, right? So then I have to stifle my voice and keep quiet because I need to live to see another day. And that is the life we're having to operate in. And it's like transness is sort of like a passage. It's like a rite to passage of trauma. It's like if you're a queer person, the only thing you're good at is to live a traumatized life. Because from the time you're growing up, you're traumatized. You are told that you're not enough, you're not worthy. There's something wrong with you, Mona Lisa, that we need to change. You need to be like men, behave like a man. We don't understand you. So what does that mean? So yeah, it's really hard for the community because then we live and share these stories. People in 2025 that are trans people still think that they're the only trans people living in Uganda before they get to meet in communities where we commune. And somebody grows up thinking, I am alone. What does that do to the mental state of an individual? So it's really hard to navigate um, an environment that does not see you as a human being.
It's really so many layers of obstacles and violence that impact work like yours. And yet another freeze that happened. So we mentioned also in our recent episodes a recent USAID funding freeze that has impacted and cut many services in Uganda. Can you talk about how this freeze has directly impacted your work in the lives of trans women in the country, and about the essential services, like you were mentioning, that have been affected since the USAID freeze?
The USAID freeze really came as a shocker. It was a devastating blow. It was too sudden, and that feeds into how leaders just wake up at a stroke of a pen and decide these people do not deserve services anymore. Because also you can see in the language, it was like, we are not going to give services to a particular section of people because they feel like that funding is wasteful. How do you continue to give services to these trans people? That's where I will concentrate because that is what I heard, right? Is to say that the funding freeze was a devastating blow and it has directly affected health programs that served trans people, especially those who are offering treatment, the ART, mental health services, because we also looked at it as a holistic kind of programming that we did around HIV response. And that really hit people that were directly doing this work. And we know that the peer-led system that communities like our own do is to say, how am I able to bring services to my other individual that cannot access a health facility because they are being discriminated and stigmatized against. And so we had that support system of people that were peers, and their primary goal or something that really grounded them was, how am I going to bring services closer to my people, consumables? Yes, you can speak of transness and health related services, and you forget those vital services that are needed within our communities. But those all had to come to an end, because when you tell somebody USAID funding that has been going to you is stopped, and this was the lifeline of most of our organizations that were doing this work, because then we can also remember that how we entered within activism was around health service programming to be able to be accepted. So most of my organizations where I support in coordination is they were dealing directly in providing services to the community members in terms of drop-in centers that had medications that are really life-saving. I would say that, right? Because it's not just about HIV response in itself, but there are other drugs that people were getting from those spaces. So when that funding freezes, it means you're also freezing those vital services that those particular people need. So it has been a very big blow, and it is hard for me to suggest the alternatives around that, because we also are very aware that US is one of the biggest funders when it comes to um, really the health sector in most of our African countries. So it is really hard for me to suggest that there will be somebody to cover up that dent that has been created, and how soon that will be covered up. And then we are dealing with people's lives here. So I am very worried of the number of people that we are going to lose that were surviving because there was that funding. And then the tangerine man from the Oval Office in US decides to say no. So it's that painful. And also back to the communities that do this work, we knew that a percentage of it was going to support them in terms of paying for their salaries, however little that money was. So when you pay for somebody's salaries, that to me, it means that you are also sort of supporting them in terms of their livelihood, because then they're able to pay rent, feed themselves, and treat themselves, and just live as a people. So when that funding did freeze, we saw so many of them laid off. And we know the vulnerabilities that come with people not being economically empowered. It leads to other issues. It spills over. It does really spill over. So now people are having to deal with issues of homelessness. Somebody that had a job before is saying, Mona, I just need $3 to survive for that particular day. And that money is nowhere. And even if I wanted to help, how long and sustainable is that? So really, USAID funding freeze was such a big blow to the community. And we are also seeing effects of that in the ways that our allies, our partners, when it came to that service delivery, are now acting up. Somebody that was much more lenient and accommodating because they were receiving money on your behalf to implement, that tap has been closed. What does that mean for that health worker who is no longer benefiting from you? So then they don't give a fuck. And excuse my English. So they don't care anymore. They don't really care. They are saying, oh, now that you even don't have the monies anymore to give us to feed our homes, what do we need with you? So we're also seeing that allyship are slowly reducing when it comes to that sector, and yet they are very important. These are people that have been with us for the longest. These are people that we have been able to refer and link the communities to get that kind of service, right? And so that tap has closed. All those people are disgruntled. And it's not only with us, actually. I also feel very sorry for the health workers that were working with us, right? Because then they are also having to deal with what is happening now. And it's not a cute place to be at when you're not sure of tomorrow. And we also see that the funding freeze, and it's sort of also spilled over in how other countries are behaving around giving of funds. So we are seeing more countries looking more inward and saying it is America first, it is UK first. What does that mean for countries that have gotten support for the longest in these particular countries? And you just wake up one day and say, no, we're not giving you this anymore. We are cutting off the percentage from, I don't know, 5% to 2%. What does that mean for 2,500 transgender people that are not going to get services anymore? So it's been a big blow to community members. And we are seeing it really impact negatively when it comes to the mental health state of the communities that we serve. Because people are running around like headless chicken, not knowing where support is going to come from. And it's just an ugly place to be at for now.
And you were speaking on allies and their support, or the lack of the support. What would you say are like the most effective ways that allies within Uganda and internationally should, and I guess you would hope they would, to support the queer community in Uganda and Africa during this time?
Literally, we live in a very global village, right? And so we can't continue to silo the work and say, that's not our issue, or this is not our issue, let them deal with it. And I think for me, something that I draw from COVID-19 is it taught us that solidarity does matter if we need to survive and keep afloat. If you think that these effects will not spill over in your countries, you need to rethink what that means. And we also saw it in the way how people were voting for Trump. In the very beginning, they were very excited, but it's coming back to bite them. And we are seeing protests happening. So, what does that signal? That we need intentional, international, and local allies that can really amplify our voices in spaces we can't be, because we also know that we can't be everywhere. And we know that there are spaces that are closed off from us. But if we know we have that ally within an embassy, within all these places of power, is to say, how do we use them to really amplify our voices? Of course, with our input, so that that is our message, right? And not tainted by them. And we need to continuously use these allyships to be able to fund underground support systems. And we also need to think of differently in how do we fund organizations that have been deregistered. Are you always going to be very rigid around we are only supporting people that are registered, and yet you know you're dealing with a context that is surveilling people and seeks to do away with them? There must be alternatives to funding such communities. And those are communities like ourselves, right? Because also as a strategy of the movement is to say, if I need to keep safe and do this work, I'm not going to go and register myself at the Uganda Registration Services Bureau, because then that is a point of contact with them to start the surveillance work. But that does not mean I'm not doing the work. So we also need allies and partners to look into that context of how do we support differently and support with dignity. Because there's also one thing of giving money, but also how is the money being given, right? And also something around what our allies can do. I really hope that they can continue to support us in running our business, because I mean our organizations, right? And so we're seeing so many allies And why I'm saying allies, I know allies come in different shapes and forms, but most of our work is really grounded in the financial support that people have been able to give us over time. So funders not playing the wait and see game and actually funding in a time of crisis is really important to keep us afloat. Because then we're also seeing so many being intimidated and they are further pushing themselves away from the community because they'd also fear that attachment and the repercussions to that attachment with the community. And so we need allies that are bold to be able to stand up and defend what is right. Because I feel like now there's a normalcy of anti-rights, anti-everything that we have fought for. And I used to look up to those superpowers back then because most of these beautiful instruments that we use today, I would say, came from the United States. Yeah, when you speak of the UDHR, it was crafted there. So such an entity waking up one day and is saying that no, these things don't make sense anymore. I am worried. So people should be able to challenge that and say that is not okay. It is no, we can't normalize that as we are normalizing the mass murders happening in Gaza and in all those regions in South Sudan. That is something that we can't keep quiet about. Because also we have siblings there. There's that intersectionality of our issues as human rights people that do this work. So also drawing from that to say we can't keep quiet in these times and we need bold allies, intentional and meaningful partnerships in that to be able to support us keep afloat in such times. So that is what I think of allies doing for us in such a time.
And still looking at the future, what do you hope for the trans community in Uganda?
I'm torn between two things. One, I'm very optimistic and sometimes pessimistic because of the way the world is being run of late. It's like people do not have empathy anymore. So part of my aspirations and hopes for our communities is that we do not lose the driving force that has kept us going for long. And it's easy to just pull the plug and say, I give up. But this is a time we need to fight back, push back the pushback of anti-rights, because that is what it is. To say that we can't bow down. We can't give into the narrative of it's just male and female. No, the world does not operate like that. And if it's something that we can learn from nature, nature can never be boxed. So as a trans community, we need to push back the pushback. We need to be in solidarity with each other. And those are part of my hopes and aspirations, that we stop bickering and fighting within us and actually see how we can work together to push back the people that are pushing back. And they're only pushing back because of the so many gains and wins we've had over time, to say that a trans person can actually be in spaces where they were not 10 years ago. What does that mean? They are scared. And for me, that's a stupid scare, because why would you be terrified of another human being that is just living their authentic selves and be schooled more? So I really aspire to that future of trans people that don't give up, that really are doing this work from the core of their being, to say that this is what I believe in. Because it's also very easy to be swayed away, to say, am I actually living an authentic life being this person? And so to constantly remind yourself that you belong, that is who you are. And it's not an indoctrination of sorts or recruitment, as what they say. And live your authentic self. I think we need more of us that can speak truth to power to continue to do this work.
Definitely. And speaking of working together, as you were talking about, to wrap up our conversation, what organizations or resources would you like to direct our listeners to to help support trans women in Uganda?
I would first of all, of course, give praise to an organization where I'm belonging, the Uganda National Trans Forum. We are seeing ourselves having to weather the storm in such a very volatile situation, but we are not bowing down and saying that we are going to continue to serve our communities because that is what we know that is right for us to do. So I really draw attention to people listening in to support the Uganda National Trans Forum. And resources look differently to different people. So it could be finances, it could be that academia that you put out, a publication that you put out, the speaking out of communities, not necessarily trans communities, but saying, no, actually, these people deserve to live and be. And that is something that I really want people to pay attention to as we communicate our voices and our realities. I also want to draw the broader community to spaces like this one, the Podcast of Royal Race Initiative. Because honestly, if this platform was not created for me, this voice would be silenced. So I'm also drawing more support to such initiatives and innovations that young people are really bringing out now to say that how do we amplify our voices in spaces that are stifling and seeking to gag us to not to speak. I'm drawing attention to Sexual Minorities Uganda, which is an umbrella organization that has really also been able to bring us together to think on how do we counter the anti-rights narratives and their propaganda. I'm drawing really good attention to Trans Network Uganda because we also partner with them and do lots of work around how do we consolidate the movement together. What does movement building look like for trans and gender diverse persons? And so I also draw attention to them. And lastly, I'm thinking of the Uganda Key Populations Consortium that has really, really held us in such times and been able to give us space and platform to voice our needs, to voice what we need to see done differently, and just be able to platform us in spaces that we would ideally not be in. So I want that attention to go there. And generally to the situation happening in Uganda, because we are a small group, but this is coming for each and every one of us. So if people think this is a trans issue, they need to think differently. They need to think of what does it mean for people who are no longer believing, for example, in abortion. That means you're taking away the bodily autonomy of people. And so this is not a trans issue. So I'm drawing also attention to the larger Ugandan community and the global community to say that these are not just sexual minority issues. These issues do cut across. And as I know, as a people, we don't live single lives. Our lives are really intertwined and interconnected. And so all our issues are interconnected. So if they say they came for the Jews and we kept quiet, they came for the trans people, we kept quiet, they are going to come for you cisgender men and women. And I hope you have people that support you moving forward if you have not been able to be there for communities that needed you in a time where they were facing a lot of backlash.
Monalisa, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. This has been an absolutely incredible conversation. I really appreciate you sharing so much of your work and your experiences with me. These were most of our questions. Is there anything else you'd like to say that you feel like we've missed?
I want to flag off the strategies we have been able to use as a community in this time and saying we can't continue to work in silos, but actually to work together. And so we are thinking of how does organizing look like now for the trans community. And some of the things that I really will touch base on is we are really leveraging on social media to amplify our voices in spaces that we know we can't be part of, but social media will reach. And I think that's the power of what technology can do in such times. So we are leveraging that. We are still working with the government. However volatile the situation is that we still believe in the constitutionality of what was written within our documents that are supposed to regulate people, and to say that you said human rights are for all human beings. So using that angle to actually be able to speak out on issues that don't seem to be issues of human rights, but actually of degrading people and belittling people, is to still engage government, because also they hold a lot of power and we can only do so much if they're not on our side. So we have something that we call the Convening for Equality, which is really a space for community to come together and strategize on how do we respond to anti-rights movements, right? So this is it's a space. It's a space for us to actually just think about how do we do this work differently, and what does support look like for every one of us, because we bring also different powers, different skills and technicalities into this work. So that is a space for us to think differently. We are doing opposition monitoring in such a time. So our organizing right now is really, really focused on who are these anti-rights actors, where are they from, who is funding them, why this narrative right now, right? And it's because of all the wins we've had. So also being very intentional around that. We are documenting community stories, and we are not looking at the sad stories alone, so that the angle we are taking now is to say, we are a resilient community. We are living in Uganda and we're still doing this work. So deal with it. We are tired of reporting deaths and violations all the time. We have pockets of joy. We have people that have been very instrumental in moving this movement. So we can't continue reporting about only the bad things. It's really traumatizing. And we are so done with it. Yes. And we are rebranding ourselves in the way that we do this work. So partly in how we are organizing now is to say, how do we present two faces at the same time? Because also we are very aware that you will not register as Uganda National Trans Forum and be given a certificate to operate. So we are also encouraging our community members, where we give support as a coordinating body, to really look into aspects of rebranding. And however sad it is, even in the language, we are doing it because also it's a tactic of survival. Is to say, if you go in as a transgender person, few chances are that you'll be listened to. And yet, those are spaces where decisions about our lives are being made. And so we are also trying to be very careful on crafting language that is so broad, but then it speaks to our needs, to not be targeted. And so I needed to really flag that out.
Thank you for listening to the Debunque podcast. I'm your host, Mariana, and today we heard from Ugandan trans advocate Monalisa Akitole. You can hear other insightful conversations in our previous episodes found on Spotify, YouTube, and other audio platforms. Thank you to Monalisa for sharing your experience with us.